Your job starts tracking your response speed. Your availability score drops every time you focus. And suddenly, deep work looks like disobedience. Welcome to Momentum Mind. This is Deep Work by Cal Newport, retold as a world where floating screens bait you, meetings ambush you, and silence gets you judged. Stay with me, because you're about to learn how to build focus so strong the chaos can't touch it. Chapter 1. The Glass Harbor of Shallow Lights. The city was built like a mirror that never slept. From above, it looked like a bay filled with glass, all the towers curved and glossy, catching the pale sky and throwing it back in bright shards. Along the streets, screens floated in the air like tame lanterns. They hummed softly, always offering something, a message, a joke, a warning, a headline that felt urgent until it didn't. People moved beneath these lights with quick steps and quick eyes, as if the ground itself might change if they stayed still too long. In this city lived a man who made his living with his mind. He did not hammer iron or carry crates. He didn't stitch cloth or paint walls. His work was the kind that could be done with a clean table and a quiet room, the kind of work that could build bridges out of ideas, the kind that could turn confusion into something that stood upright. But the city did not reward quiet. The city rewarded response. In the tallest district, where offices stacked like honeycomb cells, the man sat at a desk that was never truly his. It was a thin slab of wood in a sea of thin slabs. There were no doors, only aisles. The air smelled of warm plastic and sweet coffee. Above the desks, the floating lantern screens drifted like curious birds, dipping close to faces, presenting new sparks of distraction. A bell would chime, small and bright, and someone would laugh. Another bell, another laugh, another quick tap of fingers. The man's fingers tapped too. He answered. He reacted. He slid from task to task like a stone skipping across water. Every skip felt like motion. Every skip looked like work. But inside him, a heavier feeling dragged. He had once tasted something else. He had once taken an idea and held it in both hands, turning it slowly, listening for the hidden shape inside it. In those moments, time had not felt like a hallway filled with people. Time had felt like a deep lake. When he sank into it, the world above grew muffled. He could see farther down than he thought possible. He could come back up with something rare. Now, he barely touched the surface. The city had a name for what everyone did all day, the drift. It was a polite word for being pulled by other people's needs, other people's questions, other people's noises. The drift was praised. It meant you were available. It meant you were in the loop. It meant you could be counted on to answer before the echo died. The man tried to resist. He bought heavier notebooks, as if thick paper could anchor him. He downloaded tools that promised focus, tools that promised calm. He made lists that looked like ladders to a better life. But the floating lantern screens always found a crack. They knew him. They learned his habits. They brought him exactly what would make his eyes flick up and his thoughts scatter. A new message from a colleague. A request from a manager. A little red glow that meant someone, somewhere, had spoken his name into the air. And so he stayed in the drift, not because he loved it, but because the city treated it as normal weather. One afternoon, when the light outside had turned soft and the towers looked like they were melting into the sky, the man's manager leaned over the desk divider. The manager's smile was pleasant, practiced, and slightly tight, like a mask that pinched at the corners. "Just checking," the manager said, voice calm but quick. "Did you see the note I sent?" The man's stomach tightened. He had seen it. He had meant to answer. But the note had landed in the middle of a dozen other pings, and like a leaf in a stream, it had floated away. "I'll get right to it," he said, already reaching for the lantern screen. The manager nodded, satisfied, and drifted on. The man stared at his hands. He could feel the fatigue behind his eyes, the strange soreness that came from doing many things and finishing none. His mind felt like a room that people kept walking through, leaving the door open, letting in wind and dust. He wanted a door. He wanted a lock. That evening, he left the honeycomb district and walked toward the older part of the city, where brick buildings crouched between newer towers like stubborn elders. Here, fewer lantern screens hovered. The air sounded different, as if the street itself breathed slower. He found a small bookstore wedged between a repair shop and a cafe that smelled of toasted bread. The bookstore's sign was faded, its letters peeling. The windows were crowded with paper spines and handwritten notes. When he stepped inside, a bell rang with a real sound, not a digital imitation. Dust floated in warm light. The silence felt thick enough to lean on. Behind the counter sat an old bookseller with gray hair tied back and eyes that looked sharp and amused. The bookseller was reading, not skimming, not glancing up every few breaths, but reading the way a person drinks water when they are truly thirsty. The man stood awkwardly, as if he had forgotten how to behave in a room that didn't demand his attention in pieces. The bookseller finally looked up. "You look like someone who's been living on crumbs," the bookseller said. The man almost laughed. "Is it that obvious? It's the way you keep listening for a noise that isn't here," the bookseller said, tapping the counter gently. "The city trains people to expect interruption like thunder." The man exhaled, surprised at how much it helped. "I don't know how to stop." The bookseller's gaze slid over him, as if reading his posture like a page. "Then you're in the right place," the bookseller said. "But you should know, what you're looking for isn't a trick. It's a craft. It takes practice. It takes sacrifice. The city doesn't like it." The man frowned. "Why wouldn't the city like it?" "Because when you go deep," the bookseller said, voice dropping as if sharing a secret, "you stop being easily pulled." The bookseller stood and moved to a shelf that was partly hidden behind a hanging curtain of old maps. From there, they took a book wrapped in plain cloth, the kind of wrapping used for something fragile. They brought it back and set it on the counter with care, as if the wood might bruise it. The man touched the cloth. It felt cool, almost damp, like stone in shade. "What is it?" he asked. The bookseller's eyes gleamed. "A manual for building a door inside your mind," the bookseller said. "A way to sink beneath the noise and stay there long enough to bring back treasure." The man's throat tightened. "I don't believe in manuals anymore." "You don't have to believe," the bookseller said. "You have to try." The man hesitated, then unwrapped the cloth. The cover underneath was simple. No shining title, no loud promise. Just a quiet wait, as if the book itself had been waiting a long time to be opened by someone who needed it. He flipped it open. The pages were not filled with scattered advice. They felt arranged, deliberate, like stones placed carefully in a path. The words spoke of a kind of work that required full attention, the kind that could shape a person's skill into something sharp and valuable. The words spoke of a world where distraction had become a tide, and only those who learned to dive could reach the hidden floor. It wasn't written like a sermon. It read like a map. The man turned a page, then another. The bookstore around him faded. He began to imagine a room with a heavy door, a desk, a window that looked out onto still water. He imagined silence not as emptiness, but as a tool. He imagined hours that didn't break apart like thin ice. The bookseller watched him with a small, knowing smile. "Why does it feel," the man murmured, "like this is forbidden?" The bookseller leaned forward. "Because you've been told, again and again, that constant connection is the same as value," the bookseller said. "But there are other values. Deeper ones." The man closed the book, fingers lingering on the cover as if it were warm now. "If I take this," he said, "what happens?" The bookseller's eyes narrowed slightly, not unkindly. "If you take it seriously," they said, "you will begin to change the shape of your days. And when you do, the city will notice. It will test you. It will tempt you. It will call you selfish, slow, invisible. It will offer you easy praise for returning to the drift." The man swallowed. He could already hear the floating lantern screens, already feel their itch in his mind, even in this quiet room. "And if I don't return?" The bookseller's voice softened. "Then you will learn what it feels like to be dangerous again." The word dangerous landed in him like a spark. He paid for the book with money that felt suddenly small compared to what he wanted. He wrapped it again in cloth and tucked it under his arm. When he stepped back outside, the street noise rose around him. The floating lantern screens drifted at the edges of the older district too, hungry and patient. The man walked faster, gripping the book like a secret. On the way home, his own lantern screen vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. It vibrated again. He ignored it. His pulse quickened, not from fear but from something else, the strange thrill of not obeying. At home, his apartment was a neat box high in the glass harbor. The windows showed the city glittering, each screen a tiny star. He set the book on his table, then stood staring at it. He could hear a faint hum through the walls, neighbors watching streams, voices speaking from devices, a constant undertone of being connected. His lantern screen buzzed again, impatient now. He didn't pick it up. He sat down instead, opened the cloth, and opened the book. The first instructions did not offer comfort. They offered a hard truth: deep work was rare, and because it was rare, it was valuable. It could make a person stand out in a city of driftwood mines. It could build things that lasted. But to do it, he would have to treat his attention like a sacred resource, not a public fountain. He read until the words felt like they were not just on the page but inside his chest. He read about how the world had shifted, how shallow tasks multiplied like weeds, how even smart people were being trained to live on the surface. He read about how focus was a skill, not a mood, and how skills could be built. Outside, the city glowed brighter as night deepened. Inside, something in him steadied, as if a compass needle had finally found north. Then his lantern screen began to ring. Not a soft buzz now. A full, sharp ring, the kind reserved for urgency. The sound cut through his new quiet like a knife. He stared at the device as it flashed a name from his workplace. He let it ring once, twice, 3 times, each ring pushing against his ribs. He reached for it. His finger hovered. The book lay open beside him, its pages calm, its words waiting. The city pulsed beyond the glass, impatient, demanding his return to the drift. The ring stopped. A message appeared on the screen without him touching it, bright as a warning flare. The man's breath caught as he read it, because it wasn't a small request or a casual question. It was the kind of message that could pull him back into the honeycomb forever if he answered the wrong way. And the city, sensing his hesitation, seemed to hold its breath with him. Chapter 2: The Door Built from Silence. The message sat on the lantern screen like a wet stamp. It wasn't long, but it carried weight in every word. A request from the highest level of his workplace. A sudden demand for something polished and clever and finished soon. The kind of demand that made people brag later about how late they stayed up, how many replies they fired off, how fast they moved. The kind of demand the drift loved, because it turned panic into proof. His hand trembled above the glass. A familiar instinct rose up, fast as a reflex. Answer now. Show you are present. Show you are useful. Show you belong. Another feeling rose beneath it, slower but deeper, like a current under choppy water. If you answer like everyone else, you will be owned like everyone else. He looked down at the open book. The page did not shout. It did not flash. It simply waited, patient as stone. He could almost imagine the bookseller's voice in the stillness. This is not a trick. It is a craft. He turned the lantern screen face down on the table. The silence that followed felt wrong, as if the room had lost a machine that was supposed to run. His heart kept racing, listening for the next buzz, the next ring, the next command. He forced himself to sit back and breathe. In the book, the words described attention like a blade. Left dull, it tore and snagged. Honed, it could cut cleanly through hard problems. But honing required something his city almost never offered: uninterrupted time. Time. Not moments. Not scraps between pings. Not tiny gulps of focus stolen in the cracks of the day. Real time, held whole, guarded. He stood, suddenly restless, and walked through his apartment as if searching for a hiding place. The rooms were small and clean, but every surface held some sign of connection: a charging cable, a spare device, a glowing indicator light that blinked like an eyelid. Even the window felt like a screen, showing the city's glittering demand. He needed a door. Not a door in the hallway. Not a door with a lock someone else could pick. A door inside his life. He pulled open a closet where he kept old coats and boxes of things he rarely touched. Dust rose. The smell of fabric and cardboard filled his nose. He stared into the narrow space, then began to clear it. He moved coats to another room, stacked boxes neatly, wiped the shelf with a towel. He did it with urgency, as if building something before the city could stop him. When he finished, the closet was empty except for a small floor mat and a single shelf. It was not much. But when he stepped inside and pulled the door almost closed, the sound of the apartment shifted. The hum of the building became distant. The lights dimmed. He stood there in the cramped dark and felt, for the first time in a long while, a strange relief. A ridiculous thought flickered through him: this is my monastery. He brought in a small chair and a wooden board he could rest on his knees. He placed the book inside. He left his lantern screen outside the closet, on the kitchen counter, face down like a sleeping animal. Then he sat, knees close to his chest, and opened the book again. The words talked about rules, not wishes. The kind of rules that didn't care whether you felt inspired. The kind of rules that created a shape for your day so your day couldn't be stolen from you. He read about the world that had grown around shallow noise. How businesses had started to confuse activity with progress, because activity was easier to see. How people had begun to build their identities around being reachable. How entire careers had become a dance of quick replies and busy calendars. He read about a different kind of life, one where the best work was done in deep, protected stretches, where the mind could follow a thread without someone yanking it away. He closed his eyes, and images came: a diver descending into dark water, a miner chipping at rock, a craftsman in a workshop with the door barred. The work was not frantic. The work was slow and deliberate and fierce. The book warned him, in plain words, that deep work would feel hard at first. His mind was used to stimulation. Used to tiny rewards. Used to hopping. Like a trained animal, it would whine and scratch when asked to sit still. Almost at once, he felt that scratch. His thoughts began to jump, seeking something easy. Did I leave the stove on? Did I answer that message? What if they think I'm ignoring them? Maybe I should just check. Just one glance. He gripped the edge of the board on his lap until his fingers ached. He stared at the page and forced himself to read, not with skimming eyes, but with slow eyes, as if each sentence mattered enough to be tasted. Minutes stretched. He did not know how long he sat there. Time behaved differently in the closet. Without the usual markers, the buzz, the ring, the ping, time became a thick rope instead of a scattering of threads. When he finally opened the closet door, his legs stiff, he felt like he had returned from somewhere else. The city was still there. The apartment still hummed. But something had changed. The craving to check the lantern screen had not disappeared, but it had weakened, like a wave that had crashed and pulled back. He walked to the kitchen counter. The lantern screen lay where he left it. He picked it up, turned it over, and saw more messages stacked like stones. More demands. More little hooks. His chest tightened again. He remembered a line from the book about boundaries. You do not defeat distraction by wrestling it all day. You defeat it by making it irrelevant in the hours you choose to go deep. He did not answer yet. Instead, he opened a notebook and wrote a plan in simple strokes, as if drawing a map for a journey. He would not drift all day and then hope for focus at night. He would carve out time when he would go deep, and he would treat that time like an appointment with something important. But the book did not pretend this was easy. It spoke of different ways people build deep practice, depending on their lives. Some vanished for long stretches like hermits. Some worked in rhythmic pulses, returning each day to the same quiet block. Some stole deep time in bursts, like a hunter waiting for the right moment. The man read these patterns and felt both hope and fear. Hope, because there were many paths. Fear, because every path demanded that he say no, again and again, to the city's favorite song. He looked at the message from above. He could answer quickly, throw himself into a swirl of shallow urgency, and earn the familiar praise. Or he could answer differently. He began to draft a reply. His fingers moved slowly. He did not apologize for not responding instantly. He did not perform panic. He wrote with calm, stating when he would deliver the work and what he needed to do it well. He asked for clarity. He set a boundary, not like a wall built in anger, but like a fence built to protect a garden. He stared at the words, feeling his pulse in his throat. Sending this message felt like stepping out onto a ledge. He sent it. For a moment nothing happened. The lantern screen did not explode. The building did not shake. The city did not strike him with lightning. But he knew the true test would come later, when people reacted. When they pushed. When they tried to pull him back into the drift with guilt and urgency and flattery. He set the lantern screen down. He returned to his closet monastery and sat again, this time not just reading but thinking. If he wanted deep work, he would have to train his mind like a muscle. The book spoke of how attention grows stronger with use, and how distraction grows stronger too, if fed. Every time he gave in to the itch, he made the itch worse. Every time he resisted, he weakened it. So he began to practice resisting in small ways. He would wash dishes without listening to anything. He would drink tea while staring out the window without reaching for a screen. He would walk to the corner store and let boredom nip at his heels without distracting himself away from it. At first boredom felt like a swarm of gnats. It buzzed around his thoughts, irritating, relentless. He wanted to sweat it away with news, with messages, with anything. But slowly, something else appeared beneath boredom, a calm, a quiet space where his mind started to settle into deeper patterns all on its own. Ideas that had been scattered began to collect. Problems he had avoided began to show their shapes. It was as if, by refusing the city's constant bright snacks, he had allowed his mind to remember how to cook real food. Then came the next challenge, the shallow work that still had to be done. The book did not pretend the world could be ignored. There were emails, meetings, quick tasks that kept the machinery running. But it spoke about treating those tasks like errands, not like life itself. Shallow work could be contained if he treated it as something with boundaries, something done in a planned window, not something that seeped into every corner. So he began to schedule shallow work the way he might schedule cleaning a room. He would gather it into blocks, do it quickly, and then close the door. The first time he tried, he failed. A message came in while he was mid-thought, and he answered. Then he answered another. Then another. The deep time he had set aside dissolved into foam. He felt frustration flare, hot and sharp. He returned to the book in the closet, jaw tight. It spoke of willpower like a candle. You could not carry it through a storm for long. You needed systems. You needed rituals. You needed an environment that made deep work the default, not a heroic exception. So he made his ritual heavier. When deep time began, he would close every open tab. He would write down the single thing he would pursue. He would set a clear end point. He would tell himself, with a firmness that surprised him, that he did not exist for anyone else during that span. He even bought a simple timer that did not connect to anything, a small device that clicked softly as it counted. The sound was comforting, like footsteps on a familiar path. Day by day, he practiced. He still slipped sometimes. The city was clever. It offered emergencies that weren't emergencies, and it offered praise that felt like warmth. But he began to feel a difference in his body when he went deep. His shoulders loosened. His thoughts stopped rattling. Hours that used to vanish into nothingness began to produce something solid, a clear page, a solved knot, a piece of work that felt like it had a spine. Then, one morning, he arrived at the honeycomb district and walked through the aisles of desks as if he were carrying an invisible secret. People buzzed around him. Lantern screens dipped and flashed. His colleagues spoke in quick bursts, half listening as they typed. The manager's laughter rose and fell like a signal. He sat down and opened his computer. He did not open the message stream first. He opened the document he needed to shape. He wrote at the top of the page what he intended to build, simple and blunt. He began. At first, the noise around him tugged. He could hear his name somewhere, floating. He could see the lantern screens hovering at the edge of his vision, ready to pull him into a new thread. He kept going anyway. He felt himself sinking, slowly, like a stone. Then the manager appeared again, leaning over the desk divider, that practiced smile returning. "Hey," the manager said brightly. "We're hopping on a quick call in a bit. You free?" The man's fingers paused over the keys. He could feel how shallow this would be. He could also feel how refusing would look. His mouth went dry. He thought of his closet door. He thought of the calm weight of the book. He thought of the message he had sent, the boundary he had drawn. He looked up at the manager and saw, for the first time, the manager's own exhaustion, hidden under speed. The manager wasn't a villain. The manager was caught in the same current, just clinging to a different piece of driftwood. "I can join later," the man said carefully. "I'm in the middle of something that needs full attention. Can we do it after?" The manager blinked. The practiced smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. Around them, the office noise seemed to sharpen, as if the lantern screens themselves had leaned in to listen. The manager's eyes narrowed, not in anger yet, but in surprise, as if the man had spoken a language no one used here anymore. "What is it you're working on?" the manager asked, voice still light but with an edge underneath. "That can't be interrupted?" And in that moment the man understood. The city had noticed his door. It would not let him build it without a fight. Chapter 3: The War for the Hours. The manager's question hung in the air like a hook. Around them, the honeycomb district kept buzzing, but the sound seemed to tilt toward the man's desk, as if the lantern screens had turned their bright faces to watch. His coworkers didn't look up fully, yet he felt their attention in the way people sense a sudden hush at a party. The manager's smile stayed in place, but it no longer looked friendly. It looked like a test. The man swallowed and kept his voice steady. "The work from above," he said. "The piece we need to deliver. I'm building the core of it." The manager nodded, slow. "And you can't do that with us on a quick call." "I can," the man said, choosing words like stepping stones. "But it will take longer, and the result will be worse. I need a stretch of time where I'm not switching." The manager's eyes flicked to the lantern screen hovering near the man's monitor. It glowed with unspoken expectation, like a small sun that insisted the world must orbit it. The manager exhaled through their nose. "Fine," the manager said. "But don't disappear. We need you." The manager walked away, and the office returned to its ordinary noise. Still, the man felt something new, not victory, but the beginning of a war. Because now the city knew what he was trying to do. It would not attack all at once. It would do what it always did. It would press from the edges. A colleague strolled by with a friendly question that could have waited. A request popped up with the word urgent stamped across it like a brand. A calendar invite arrived without warning, landing squarely on the deep time he had planned. None of these things were catastrophic alone. Together they were a swarm. He worked anyway. He forced his eyes back to the document. He followed the thread of his thought, held it, refused to drop it for every new tug. Each time he ignored a ping, a small alarm rose in his chest, as if he were doing something rude, something dangerous. The feeling made him sweat. It made his jaw tighten. But he noticed something else too. when he stayed with the work began to open like a door into a larger room. Ideas that had been cramped started to stretch. Connections appeared that he wouldn't have seen if he had kept hopping. His fingers moved with purpose instead of panic. By midday, he had shaped something solid. It wasn't finished, but it had a spine. He could feel it. He could imagine how it would stand when complete. Then the city struck harder. A message came from above, sharp and sudden, asking for an update right now. Not later. Not when convenient. Now. The man's stomach dropped. He stared at the words, feeling the old reflex slam against his ribs: respond instantly or be punished. His hand moved toward the lantern screen almost on its own. He stopped. In the book, he remembered, there was talk of visibility. Shallow work was visible. Deep work was often invisible until it was complete. In a world addicted to constant signals, people mistrusted what they could not see being done. He understood then that part of his new life would involve translation. He could not just do deep work, he would have to protect it and explain it in a language the drift could understand. He wrote an update that was brief and clear. He did not describe every thought. He described the milestones, the tangible pieces. He offered a time when he would deliver the next chunk. He sent it and returned to the work. The reply from above came quickly. Good. Keep me posted. Not warm praise, but not anger either. The man let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Still, the pressure did not stop. It seeped into meetings. It hid in casual chats. It showed up in the way people said, with a laugh that wasn't fully a joke, "You're hard to reach these days." He began to notice the city's rules more clearly now that he was breaking them. The city's strongest rule was not written anywhere, but everyone obeyed it: if you are reachable, you are good. If you are always responding, you are valuable. If you are constantly busy, you are safe. Deep work challenged that rule. Deep work said, I will be unreachable on purpose. I will not show my busyness as proof. I will disappear into effort and return with results. That made people uneasy. One afternoon, he was called into a glass-walled room for a meeting. The walls were transparent, meant to signal openness. In practice, they made every movement inside feel like a performance. The man sat at a table while the manager and two others leaned over tablets, their faces lit from below. They spoke about collaboration, about speed, about being aligned. Their words were smooth, but the man felt the undercurrent: we miss your constant presence. We miss the easy assurance that you are drifting with us. The manager finally turned to him. We've noticed you've been harder to pull into quick threads, the manager said, tone careful. Is everything okay? Everything okay. The city's polite way of asking, why aren't you behaving? The man forced himself not to flinch. Everything's fine, he said. I'm trying to protect stretches of focused time so I can produce better work. One of the others, a senior colleague with sharp eyebrows, gave a small laugh. Focused time, they repeated, as if tasting the phrase. We're all focused. We're just also responsive. The man felt heat climb his neck. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say that what they called focus was a flickering candle in a windstorm. But he knew that would turn this into a fight about feelings. He needed to make it about outcomes. I'm still responsive, he said. Just not instantly. When I'm deep, I'm not switching. But I'm delivering faster and with higher quality. The senior colleague's eyes narrowed. And who decides what's higher quality? The question landed like a stone. The man's chest tightened. This was the danger the book had hinted at. Deep work could make you extraordinary, but it could also make you misunderstood. People often judged what they could measure easily, and what they could measure easily was not depth. It was motion. It was noise. He thought quickly. You'll see it in what I deliver, he said. Judge me by the results. The manager held his gaze for a long moment. Then the manager nodded, as if conceding a temporary truce. Fine, the manager said. But we still need predictable access. We can't have people vanishing whenever they feel like it. The word vanishing scraped his skin. The book had warned him, deep work was not just about willpower, it was about structure. Vanishing whenever you feel like it sounded like whim. That was not what he was doing. He was building a rhythm, a ritual, a predictable pattern. I understand, he said. I can set clear blocks on my calendar. Deep time, shallow time. You'll know when I'm heads down and when I'm open. That, he realized, was another form of translation. He would use the city's tools, calendars, visible blocks, to protect something the city did not naturally respect. The meeting ended, but as he walked back to his desk, he felt a chill in his stomach. The city had not killed his door, but it had put a hand on the handle. Back at his desk, he opened his calendar and began to carve his days into shapes. He marked certain hours as protected. He labeled them plainly, not with mystical words, but with something that sounded legitimate to a drifting culture. Focus block. Production block. Writing block. He felt strange doing it, like posting a sign on his own mind. Almost immediately, invites began to collide with those blocks. Some were moved. Some were ignored. Some came with little notes like, "Sorry, I know you're blocked, but this will be quick." Quick. The city's favorite lie. He learned to respond with calm firmness. Not angry, not dramatic. He would offer alternatives. He would ask if the meeting could be asynchronous. He would suggest an agenda. He would ask whether his presence was truly needed. At first, people reacted as if he had suggested something indecent. Meetings without everyone? Messages answered later? Work done quietly instead of discussed endlessly? But a few people began to adjust. A few accepted the new rhythm. A few even looked relieved, as if someone had finally given them permission to breathe. The man's deep blocks grew stronger. He began to notice that deep work was not only about the hours he protected. It was also about the way he entered those hours. If he slid into them after a morning of frantic replies, his mind thrashed, still craving tiny rewards. If he prepared, cleared shallow tasks first, set a clear goal, removed temptations, he dropped faster into depth. He started to treat the beginning of deep time like a ritual. He would close doors. He would silence the lantern screen. He would choose one target and write it on paper. He would sit down and begin, even if he did not feel ready. Sometimes, in the middle of deep work, he felt a sudden smoothness. It was as if his mind stopped fighting and began to glide. In those moments, he understood why this kind of work was precious. It was not only productive, it was alive. It made him feel like his thoughts were his own again. But even as his inner door grew sturdier, the outside world grew more cunning. The city did not only tempt with interruptions. It tempted with identity. One evening, after a day of good work, the man left the office feeling almost light. He walked through streets of glass and glowing signs, and for once he did not feel dragged. He felt like he was carrying something solid inside him. His lantern screen buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He ignored it. He passed a plaza where a crowd gathered around a floating billboard. The billboard showed smiling faces, bright slogans, and the promise of being seen. In the center of the plaza stood a stage where people took turns stepping up to share quick thoughts, quick jokes, quick opinions. Every time someone spoke, the lantern screens around the plaza flashed and chimed, showering the speaker with instant attention. The man slowed. He recognized the lure at once. The drift wasn't only about being interrupted, it was about being rewarded for shallow performance. Attention was a drug, and the city handed it out in bright little doses. A colleague spotted him and waved him over. "Come on," the colleague called, laughing. "Jump up. Say something. Get your name up there." The man's mouth went dry. He imagined stepping on stage. He imagined the chiming lantern screens, the warm rush of being noticed. He imagined how easy it would be to say something clever and leave with the glow of quick approval. And he imagined what it would cost, the quiet hunger for depth dulled by the sweet noise of applause. He hesitated at the edge of the crowd, feeling two worlds pull at him. His lantern screen buzzed again, and this time he glanced down. The notification wasn't from work. It was from the network itself, a system-wide message that lit the screen with a clean, official glow. New policy update, response expectations are changing. He frowned, reading the next line, and the blood in his veins seemed to slow. Availability metrics will be used to evaluate performance. The city had found a way to measure reachability, to turn drift into a score. A number that could be compared, ranked, punished. The man stood very still in the bright plaza, the crowd cheering behind him, his lantern screen glowing cold in his hand. Because now it wasn't only social pressure. It was a mechanism. A machine. And he had just declared war on it. Chapter 4. The Machines That Measure Breath. The policy message stayed on his lantern screen, bright as frost. Around him, the plaza kept cheering. The stage kept offering quick applause like sugar thrown to hungry birds. But the man heard it all from far away, as if his ears had sunk under water. Availability metrics. Evaluate performance. The words were calm and official, and that calm made them sharper. He slipped away from the crowd and walked with fast, quiet steps until the plaza noise fell behind him. He didn't go home right away. Home had windows that showed the city's glitter, and he didn't want glitter right now. He needed shadow. He found a narrow street where older buildings leaned close together, their bricks dark with age. There were fewer lantern screens here, as if the network's reach weakened in these tight passages. A small park sat between two buildings, fenced and half forgotten, with a single bench under a tree. The leaves shivered in a faint wind. The man sat down and held his lantern screen like it might bite. He read the message again. It was the city's newest spell, turning reachability into proof of worth. He had always known people were judged by how fast they replied, but there had been at least a thin layer of pretense, a chance to argue that real work mattered. Now the pretense was gone. Now the rule was written in the air. The man's chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped a band around his ribs. He thought of his calendar blocks, his closet monastery, his careful replies. Would any of that matter if the machine that judged him only cared about how often he surfaced? He stared at the tree's trunk, rough and solid, and tried to think. The book had warned him about the shallow world, but this was worse than he had imagined. This was not only culture. This was technology. He stood and began walking, letting motion shake loose his thoughts. The honeycomb district had always felt like a hive, but now he saw something else. The entire city was a machine designed to keep minds skimming. The floating lantern screens weren't just tools. They were instruments of training. They rewarded quickness. They punished depth with invisibility. And now they would quantify invisibility as failure. He walked until he reached the bookstore. The old sign was still there, peeling. Inside, the air was still thick with dust and warm light. The bookseller sat behind the counter again, reading as if time had no claim on them. The bell above the door rang, and the bookseller looked up with the same sharp amusement. "You came back with a storm in your eyes," the bookseller said. The man didn't bother with small talk. He held up his lantern screen. "They're measuring availability now," he said. "It's official. If I don't respond fast enough, it counts against me." The bookseller's expression didn't change much, but their eyes narrowed slightly, as if focusing on a distant object. "Of course they are," the bookseller said, as if this were as predictable as rain. "They can't measure depth, so they measure the foam." "That means I lose," the man said. He hated how hopeless his voice sounded. "If the rules reward drifting, then deep work becomes a hobby, not a career." The bookseller closed their book slowly, careful as someone putting away a blade. "No," they said. "It means the war becomes clearer." The man felt a flare of irritation. "Clearer doesn't help me pay rent," he snapped, then immediately regretted it. He was not angry at the bookseller. He was angry at the city, at himself, at the trap. The bookseller didn't react to his sharpness. "Sit," they said, gesturing to a chair near the counter. He sat. The chair creaked. The bookseller leaned forward. "Listen," the bookseller said. "A machine can count your breath, but it cannot tell whether you are alive. The city will always invent new ways to reward what it can see. Your job is not to win by their easiest measures. Your job is to become so valuable in what you produce that the shallow measures look foolish." The man stared at the counter. "That sounds like a speech." "It's a strategy," the bookseller said. "But it requires courage and craft. You must do two things at once. You must protect deep work, and you must make its results visible in a way the city cannot ignore." The man's mind shifted, searching for how. The book had spoken of this, in a way. Not as a rebellion for its own sake, but as a way to thrive in a world where deep skill had become rare. "What if they don't care?" he said. "What if they punish me before I can show results?" The bookseller tapped the counter twice, a small rhythmic sound. "Then you must reduce the surface area where they can cut you," they said. "You must shrink shallow obligations. You must create rules for when you are reachable and train people to expect them. You must make shallow work efficient and contained. You must give the city fewer hooks." The man's thoughts raced. It wasn't enough to block time. He needed to reshape his entire relationship with interruption. He looked up. "How?" The bookseller reached under the counter and pulled out a thin notebook, worn at the corners. They opened it and pointed to a page filled with neat handwriting. "Rituals," the bookseller said. "Not just for deep work, but for shallow work too. Decide where you do it. Decide when. Decide how you will process it. Decide what you refuse entirely. You must stop letting other people's urgency set the rhythm of your day." The man's mouth went dry again, but this time from something like awe. He had always treated shallow tasks as inevitable weather. He had never considered that he could build a roof. He left the bookstore with his head full of plans. At home, he stood in his closet monastery and listened to the muffled hum of the building. He could feel the lantern screens pull even from the kitchen counter, as if it were calling him by scent. He sat down, opened his notebook, and began to design his new rules as if designing a fortress. He would check messages at set times, not constantly. He would batch replies, writing them in a focused burst, not sprinkled through the day. He would turn vague, open-ended requests into clear tickets with clear outcomes. He would ask for agendas before meetings. He would decline meetings where he was not essential. He would set expectations with colleagues so his silence during deep blocks would not be interpreted as neglect, but as part of his workflow. The rules felt bold, almost arrogant. His hand hesitated as he wrote. What gave him the right to be unreachable? Then he remembered how it felt to bring back treasure from depth. How it felt to create something that wasn't flimsy. How it felt to be proud of the work instead of proud of the franticness. That was the right. The next day, he began. He announced calmly that he would be offline for certain blocks and available for others. He framed it as a way to deliver higher quality work faster. He put it in his calendar. He told his manager, not with apology, but with professional clarity. The manager raised an eyebrow. This is because of the new metrics, isn't it? The manager said. The man met their gaze. It's because the work we're judged on is getting harder, he said. We need real thinking time. The manager leaned back, fingers tapping the table. You're asking for special treatment. I'm asking for time to produce, the man said. The manager didn't say yes. The manager didn't say no. The manager said, We'll see. We'll see meant, you're on trial. That afternoon, the man entered a deep block with a tightness in his stomach. The availability machine lurked at the edge of his thoughts like a guard dog. He imagined invisible counters ticking each time he didn't respond. He imagined a report with his name, his score, his rank. He forced himself to begin anyway. At first, the fear made his focus brittle. His mind kept checking for danger. But as he stayed with the work, something steadied. The same deep lake feeling returned, faint but real, and he sank into it. When he emerged at the end of the block, he had made real progress. Not a flurry of replies. Not a pile of checked boxes. Something that mattered. Then he checked his messages. There were many. Some were irritated. Some were joking. One from a colleague read, Did you die? He ignored that one. He answered the important ones quickly, calmly, without adding extra chatter. He noticed that most messages did not actually need immediate response. They only felt like they did. As days passed, he became more skilled at seeing false urgency. He could sense when someone was trying to make their problem his emergency. He could sense when a thread could be solved with a clear answer instead of a long back and forth. He began to write messages that were sharper, more complete. He offered solutions instead of endless discussion. He proposed next steps with deadlines. He reduced the number of times a conversation bounced back and forth. To his surprise, some people liked it. They started to copy his style. They started to send fewer scattered questions and more thoughtful requests. But not everyone adjusted. A particular coworker, someone who thrived on constant chatter, began to poke at him more directly. They would drop by his desk during deep blocks, leaning over with a grin. Hey, just real quick, they'd say, always with that phrase. I know you're doing your focus thing, but I need your brain. The man tried polite deflection. Can you send it in a message and I'll look during my open block? He'd say. The coworker would roll their eyes. You and your blocks, they'd say, laughing, as if it were a quirky hobby. Then the coworker started doing something worse. They started tagging him publicly in group threads, asking questions where everyone could see he hadn't replied. They'd write things like, waiting on you. Or need this ASAP. It wasn't about the work. It was about social pressure. It was about using visibility as a leash. The man felt anger rise each time he saw it. His fingers would itch to respond immediately, to prove he was present, to erase the public stain. The availability machine seemed to hum with satisfaction when he gave in. He did give in once. He broke deep time and answered. The coworker replied with a cheerful thumbs up, and the thread moved on. The man stared at the screen, feeling a sour emptiness. He had just fed the machine. That evening, he returned to his closet and opened the book again, as if seeking counsel. The pages spoke of quitting social media-like distractions and reducing shallow inputs, not out of purity, but out of strategy. You chose tools based on whether they served your values. Not because everyone else used them. Not because the city said you had to. And if a tool drained your attention while offering little in return, you let it go. The man's eyes slid to his lantern screen, to the endless stream of tiny temptations, the way it trained him to seek small rewards instead of deep satisfaction. He had already been practicing small fasts from distraction. But this would be larger. This would be a cut. His stomach tightened with fear. What if he missed something important? What if he vanished from the social flow and lost opportunities? What if the city punished silence even harder? He thought of the bookstore again. A machine can count your breath, but it cannot tell whether you are alive. He made a list of the networks and feeds he checked out of habit. He wrote what each gave him, honestly. Most gave him little but agitation and a false sense of knowing. He decided to conduct an experiment. He would step away from the most draining feeds. Not forever, not as a grand vow, but long enough to see who he became without them. He turned off notifications he didn't need. He removed shortcuts. He made it harder for his fingers to fall into the old grooves. At first, the withdrawal was sharp. His mind kept reaching for the missing easy rewards, like a tongue probing a gap in teeth. He felt twitchy. He felt restless. He felt oddly lonely. Then, slowly, the restlessness began to transform. Without constant input, his mind started generating its own thoughts again, like a spring that had been covered and finally uncovered. Ideas surfaced while he walked. Solutions arrived in the shower. He found himself thinking about his work in richer layers, not just in the frantic moment. Deep work became easier to enter. Then the machine struck again, this time through the manager. The manager called him into the glass room and slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a chart. Clean, simple, brutal. A line that rose and fell. Your availability score, the manager said, voice neutral. The man stared at it, feeling cold spread in his gut. The line dipped during his deep blocks, exactly as he expected. The machine made his best hours look like absence. The manager leaned forward. Explain this, they said. The man's mouth was dry. He could hear his heartbeat. He wanted to say, I've been building something real. I've been doing the work you can't see until it's done. Instead, he said carefully, those are my focus blocks. They're when I do the heavy work. The work from above. The work that produces the deliverables. The manager's gaze stayed flat. And the machine says you're unavailable. The man felt the walls of the glass room around him, transparent and exposing. He felt like a fish in a bowl. Outside the glass, the office drifted, people moving, screens chiming, the city's breath steady. I am unavailable, he said quietly. On purpose. So I can deliver. The manager's eyes narrowed. This better be worth it, they said. The man held their gaze, and for the first time he didn't feel like he was begging for permission. He felt like he was making a wager. It will be, he said. The manager stood. Then show me, they said, and walked out, leaving the man alone with the chart's cold line and the hum of the city outside. He returned to his desk and worked harder, not in frantic bursts, but in depth. He poured his attention into building something strong enough to justify his rebellion. Days later, the deadline from above loomed close, and the man's work was nearly ready. He could feel its shape, the way it held together. It was better than anything he would have produced in a week of drifting. He prepared to deliver it, hands steady, breath slow. Then, just before he sent it, a new message appeared on his lantern screen, stamped with a priority glow that made the device vibrate in his palm. Mandatory meeting. Immediate. Attendance required. The sender was not his manager. It was someone above the manager. The man stared at the message, then at his nearly finished work, and felt the old fears surge back with teeth. The machine didn't just measure him. It could interrupt him at the worst possible moment. And now it was calling him into the glass room, right as he was about to prove that depth was worth the risk. Chapter 5: The Deep Forge and the Shallow Tribunal. The meeting request pulsed like a warning beacon. Mandatory. Immediate. Attendance required. The words were cold, impersonal, and absolute, the voice of a system that did not negotiate. The man stared at the glow and felt his throat tighten. His work sat open on his screen, almost complete, a structure of thought that finally stood on its own. He could see how close he was to delivering something that would speak for him. And now the city wanted to drag him into a room and make him explain himself with breathless words instead of finished results. He stood slowly, as if rising too quickly might spill the fragile calm he'd built. He saved his work, backed it up, and wrote a note to himself with the next step, as if marking a trail before being forced into fog. Then he walked. The honeycomb district's aisles seemed narrower than usual. The floating lantern screens hovered lower, their hum sharper, like insects circling a wound. People glanced at him as he passed, sensing the direction he was headed. Glass rooms were never just rooms. They were stages. At the far end of the floor was the largest glass room, the one reserved for decisions that rippled outward. Inside, silhouettes moved. He could see the manager, tense and upright. He could see the senior colleague with sharp eyebrows. And at the head of the table sat someone he had seen only from a distance before, a high figure in the organization, smooth and calm, with eyes that looked like they didn't waste time on anything they couldn't use. The door opened with a soft click. The man stepped inside. The air felt thinner here. The table was wide and glossy, reflecting faces like a shallow pool. Tablets lay in front of each person, glowing faintly. No one offered him a chair. He chose one anyway and sat. The high figure looked at him without warmth, without hostility. Pure assessment. "We've been reviewing performance signals," the high figure said, voice even. "There are concerns." The manager's jaw tightened. The senior colleague's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. The man kept his hands folded in his lap so no one could see them tremble. "What concerns?" he asked. The high figure tapped the tablet. A chart appeared on a larger screen in the room, projected as clean light. The same line the manager had shown him, but now larger, more damning. Dips. Gaps. Periods of absence. "Availability," the high figure said. "Responsiveness. Collaboration. These are core to how we operate." The man inhaled slowly. The room was quiet enough that he could hear the faint buzz of lantern screens outside the glass, like a crowd murmuring beyond a wall. "I understand," he said. "I've been intentionally protecting focus blocks." The senior colleague leaned forward. "So you admit you're unavailable?" they said, as if presenting evidence. The man met their gaze. "Yes," he said. "During focus blocks." The manager spoke quickly, as if trying to steer the conversation before it turned into a verdict. "He says it's to improve output," the manager said. "He claims the work is better." The high figure's eyes remained on the man. "Claims," they repeated. The man felt the urge to defend himself with words. But words in this room were slippery. The city was good at turning words into fog. He needed something solid. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. It was not dramatic. It was not a speech. It was a simple outline of what he had built, the key pieces, the decisions, the structure. He placed it on the table and slid it forward. "This is what I've been building," he said. "The deliverable is nearly finished. It's the core of what we were asked for." The high figure glanced at the paper, then at the tablet, then back at the man. "And you did this by not responding," they said. "I did this by not switching," the man corrected, gently but firmly. "Switching is expensive. It breaks attention. The deep work requires continuity." The senior colleague scoffed softly. "We all have interruptions," they said. "We all manage." The man felt heat rise again, but he held his tone. "Managing interruptions is not the same as doing work that requires full concentration," he said. "Some tasks can be done in fragments. Some can't." The high figure's gaze sharpened slightly, a sign of interest despite themselves. "Explain that," they said. The man's mind raced. He could not quote the book. He could not lecture. He had to paint a picture they could understand. "Imagine a forge," he said quietly. "A deep forge. You can't heat the metal for a moment, walk away, come back, heat it again, and expect it to shape well. Every time you stop, it cools. Every time you return, you spend time reheating. The shape suffers. The work takes longer. Focus blocks are the fire kept steady." The room was still. The manager looked uncertain. The senior colleague looked annoyed. The high figure looked thoughtful, like a person who had heard a metaphor and was testing its usefulness. The high figure tapped the tablet again. "And yet our system measures availability as a signal of contribution," they said. "That system measures what is easy to measure," the man said. His voice was calm now, surprisingly calm. "It doesn't measure what is valuable. Not directly." The senior colleague's eyes flashed. "Are you saying the system is wrong?" they demanded. The man looked at the chart on the screen, then back at the faces around the table. The city's machine had teeth, but it also had blind spots. This was one of them. "I'm saying it's incomplete," he said. "It rewards surface behaviors. It punishes deep production unless we account for it." The high figure leaned back slightly, as if making room for a decision. "And what do you propose?" they asked. "That we do? Turn off the system because you don't like it?" The man's stomach clenched. He had expected this. The city did not like to be told to change. It preferred individuals to bend. He chose his words carefully. "I propose that we separate shallow obligations from deep obligations," he said. "Set clear windows when I'm available, and clear windows when I'm producing. Measure me by what I deliver in those windows. If the output isn't better, then this experiment ends." The high figure studied him. "An experiment?" they said. "Yes," the man replied. with a clear result. Silence. Then the high figure spoke, and the words felt like a blade sliding out of a sheath. You understand, they said, that people will copy what you do. If we allow one person to block time and disappear, others will try. Productivity could drop. The man nodded slowly. Or it could rise, he said. If people start producing more real work and less noise. The senior colleague snorted. Or they'll hide and do nothing, they said. The high figure's eyes flicked briefly toward the senior colleague, then back to the man. Bring me the finished deliverable, they said. Soon. If it's extraordinary, you'll have room to negotiate. If it's merely adequate, this ends. The manager exhaled as if they had been holding their breath. The man nodded. You'll have it, he said. The high figure stood, signaling the meeting was over. As chairs shifted and tablets were gathered, the senior colleague leaned toward the man, voice low. You're playing a dangerous game, they murmured. The man didn't answer. He stepped out of the glass room and returned to his desk with a strange feeling in his chest. He had not been punished yet, but now everything depended on what he delivered. He sat down, opened his work, and stared at it as if seeing it for the first time. It was strong. It was coherent. But the high figure had used a word that stuck like a thorn, extraordinary. He needed more than good. He needed undeniable. He entered a deep block that afternoon as if stepping into a furnace. He shut out everything. He shut out the lantern screens, the chatter, even the fear. He focused on sharpening the work's spine, smoothing its joints, strengthening its logic until it could bear weight. Hours passed. When he emerged, the room looked different, as if he had been gone longer than he had. His eyes felt gritty. His hands ached. But the work was better. Not just polished, but alive. It had clarity like cold water. He sent it to the high figure with a simple message. No theatrics. No apology. Just a deliverable. Then he waited. Waiting was torture because waiting was shallow by nature. Waiting made his mind itch for stimulation. The city knew this. The city fed waiting with distraction. It offered him streams, updates, threads, tiny arguments he could join for a quick hit of feeling productive. He resisted. He walked outside instead, letting the air and the movement calm him. He practiced boredom like a discipline, letting his mind settle without grabbing at the nearest bright thing. When he returned, his lantern screen showed a new message. From the high figure. He opened it, and his heart kicked hard. We need to talk. Now. No praise. No verdict. Just a summons. His mouth went dry as he stood and walked back toward the glass room. The owls seemed to lean in again. The lantern screens hovered, hungry for drama. Inside the glass room, the high figure sat alone this time. No manager. No senior colleague. The room felt quieter, heavier, as if the air itself had been sealed. The high figure gestured for him to sit. The man sat. The high figure looked at him for a long moment, then slid a tablet across the table. On it was his deliverable, covered in notes. But these notes were not the frantic, shallow kind. They were precise. They were engaged. The high figure's voice was low. This is better than what we usually get, they said. The man felt something loosen in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. Thank you, he said. The high figure tapped the tablet. You were right about switching, they said, almost reluctantly. The structure is clean. The thinking is deep. It holds together. The man nodded once, slow. Then the high figure's eyes hardened again. But the city doesn't run on deep work alone, they said. It runs on coordination. On trust. On being reachable. The man could feel the pivot coming. Praise was not permission. Praise was leverage. I understand, he said. The high figure leaned forward. So here is the deal, they said. You will keep your focus blocks. We will mark them as protected in the system. But in exchange, you will become brutally efficient with everything else. Your shallow work will not sprawl. It will not leak into other people's time. You will set boundaries, and you will keep them. And you will teach your team a method that works. The man blinked. Teach your team. The words hit him like a new weight. This was not just about protecting himself now. It was about becoming an example. The city was offering him a bargain. You can go deep, but only if you help us control the chaos around you. He felt the temptation in it. A protected status. A shield against the machine. But also a leash, responsibility for other people's habits. What method? He asked, careful. The high figure's mouth tightened slightly. Whatever method keeps output high while keeping collaboration predictable. they said. If you can't create that balance, the protection ends. The man's palms were damp. He thought of the book's warnings about shallow work. He thought of his own rules, his calendar blocks, his batching, his sharper messages. Could he turn that into something teachable? Could he change a drifting culture without being swallowed by it? I can try, he said. The high figure nodded once. Good, they said. Start soon. And understand this, if your availability metrics keep dropping in a way that disrupts others, I will not defend you. The man stood, nodded, and left the glass room. As he walked back through the honeycomb, he felt the city's eyes again. The machine had not been defeated. It had been negotiated with. He had been granted a narrow corridor of freedom, but only if he could build something stable enough to justify it. At his desk, he stared at his calendar. Protected deep blocks. Efficient shallow blocks. A method for others. He could almost hear the bookseller's voice. Rituals. Rules. Systems. But something else rose in him too, a realization that made his throat tighten. If he taught others, he would become visible. Not just as a producer, but as a reformer. And reformers attracted enemies. That evening, as he packed up to leave, the senior colleague with sharp eyebrows appeared at the edge of his desk. Their smile was thin. Heard you impressed the high table, they said. The man kept his face neutral. I delivered good work, he said. The senior colleague leaned closer. Careful, they whispered. When you make the quiet look powerful, people start asking why they've been drowning in noise. Some will thank you. Some will hate you. Before the man could reply, the colleague straightened and walked away, leaving the warning hanging like smoke. The man went home, stepped into his closet monastery, and opened the book. He read not for comfort but for guidance. He needed to build a practice strong enough to survive the city's machine, and now he needed to build it in others too. He looked at the pages and saw, between the lines, the deeper truth. Deep work was not only a personal habit. It was a kind of resistance. A way of living that demanded you choose what mattered, again and again, even when the world measured you by the wrong things. He closed the book and sat in the dark closet, listening to the building's hum. His lantern screen, left outside, began to buzz. Not a work message. A new thread on the network, public, spreading fast, tagged with his name. People were talking about him. The title of the thread glowed with sharp curiosity, and his stomach sank as he read it. Is he gaming the system? He stared into the closet darkness, feeling the city's eyes turn toward his door. And this time, it wasn't a manager asking a careful question. It was the crowd. Chapter 6. The Quiet That Bites Back. The thread moved like fire across dry grass. By the time he looked at it again, the words had multiplied, twisting as they traveled. People who barely knew him had opinions about his motives. People he had nodded at in hallways now spoke as if they had watched his every hour. The city loved a story, and it loved one that made busyness look like virtue and silence look like crime. Some messages were mocking. Some were angry. Some were sweet on the surface and poisonous underneath. Must be nice to disappear. So he thinks he's too good to answer. He's probably just avoiding work. This focus thing is a scam. His chest felt hollow. It was one thing to negotiate with a manager, another to face the public mind of the city. A machine could be argued with, bargained with, mapped. A crowd could not. A crowd was weather with teeth. He set the lantern screen down as if it were hot. In the closet monastery, the darkness pressed close. The book lay on his lap, open but unread. He could not focus on words while the city's whisper crawled under his skin. He tried to breathe slowly, but each inhale felt like it caught on something sharp. A part of him wanted to rush out into the thread and defend himself, to respond to every accusation, to prove he was still reachable, still likable, still one of them. The drift had always offered that comfort: if you respond, you belong. But he knew that was exactly how the city would win. It would pull him into an endless public argument, make him spend his attention on smoke instead of substance, and then point at his lowered output as proof that deep work was nonsense. He forced himself to stand. He left the closet and walked to the sink. He ran cold water over his hands until his fingers numbed. He stared out the window at the glass harbor, the towers glittering with 1,000 tiny pings. Somewhere in those towers, people were reading about him, chattering, feeling righteous. He did not owe them his mind. The thought surprised him. It felt bold, almost rude. But it also felt true. He returned to the closet and opened the book again. This time he read with hunger, seeking not comfort but a plan. The pages spoke, without mercy, about attention as a finite resource. It spoke about the danger of shallow inputs that pretended to be necessary. It spoke about choosing tools and channels with ruthless clarity. Use what supports what you care about, discard what doesn't, even if everyone else insists it's essential. The city's public thread was not essential. It was a trap. He made a decision. He would not engage the thread. Not once. Not even a small correction. He would let the crowd talk itself tired. He would answer only in the language that mattered: output, clarity, reliability in the windows he had set. He would also do something the book had hinted at but that he had avoided because it felt too strict. He would make a clean end to his workday. The city had no edges. It leaked into evenings, into weekends, into sleep. The drift was endless because it never declared itself finished. The book spoke of the power of stopping, of walking away in a deliberate way so the mind could recover and return strong. He had been working deep blocks, yes, but he had still allowed the city to claw at him after hours. He had still checked. Still peeked. Still carried the hum into bed. No more. He wrote a small ritual for ending the day. He would review what remained unfinished, capture it in a trusted place, plan the next steps, and then close the door. When he stopped, he would stop fully. No pretending. No half-stopping while secretly sipping from the city's noise. The next morning, he arrived at the honeycomb district with his stomach knotted but his plan clear. He could feel it immediately. The atmosphere around his desk had changed. Conversation softened when he walked by. A few people looked at him with curiosity, as if expecting him to do something dramatic. Others avoided eye contact, as if silence were contagious. The senior colleague with sharp eyebrows watched him from across an aisle, expression unreadable. His manager approached, face tight. "There's chatter," the manager said quietly, glancing around. "About you." "I know," the man said. "Are you going to address it?" the manager asked, voice strained, as if hoping for a quick fix. The man shook his head. "Not publicly," he said. "I'm not spending my attention on that. I'll keep delivering. I'll keep being available when I said I'd be available." The manager looked doubtful. "People are upset. People are hungry," the man said softly. "They're hungry for attention. Hungry for something to point at. If I feed it, it grows." The manager frowned, then exhaled. "Just don't let this disrupt the team," they said, and walked away. The man sat at his desk. The lantern screens hovered, their hum a little sharper, as if sensing conflict. He opened his calendar. He entered his deep block. As he began, he felt the itch of fear. What if they call another meeting? What if someone tags him again? What if the high figure decides this is too messy? He wrote anyway. He entered the deep forge, lighting it with his attention. The work he chose now was not just another deliverable. It was the method the high figure had demanded, the method he would teach. He needed to turn his private craft into a shape others could follow. He began by writing a simple doctrine, not as rules carved in stone but as a shared agreement. Deep time must be protected. Shallow work must be contained. Meetings must earn their place. Messages must not multiply without purpose. He wrote in clear language, simple enough that no one could hide behind confusion. He drafted a system for the team, focus blocks on shared calendars, predictable windows for responses, templates for requests that forced clarity, an expectation that the first message should include enough detail to reduce back and forth. He designed meeting rules, agendas required, outcomes defined, small attendance by default, time limits that forced precision. He outlined how to handle shallow work quickly, batching, processing, making decisions instead of spinning. He did not call it a revolution. He called it a way to work without drowning. When the deep block ended, he had a document that felt like a scaffold. He read it once, then twice, sharpening its edges. He sent it to his manager and the high figure with a simple note: proposed team protocol for focus and coordination. Then he waited. This time, he did not check the public thread. He did not lurk. He did not seek the city's temperature. He stayed with his planned shallow window, answered messages with clean efficiency, then returned to deeper tasks. By afternoon, a response arrived from the high figure. "Bring this to a team session. Run it." The man's stomach flipped. Run it meant, stand in front of the hive and tell them to stop buzzing. A meeting was scheduled. A real one, not a quick call. The manager insisted on it, perhaps because structure was the only way to keep the situation from turning into a shouting match. The invite went out to the whole team. The man's name was in the title. He could feel the city holding its breath again. When the day came, he walked into the large glass room with a laptop under his arm. The room was full. People sat with arms crossed, phones glowing faintly in their hands like talismans. Some looked curious. Some looked irritated. Some looked eager, as if hoping for drama. The manager stood at the side, tense. The senior colleague with sharp eyebrows sat near the front, chin lifted, ready to strike. The man set up his screen. The glass walls reflected 100 faces, making it feel like he was surrounded by duplicates. He began. He did not mention the thread. He did not defend himself. He spoke only about the work. "We're being judged by what we produce," he said, voice steady. "And the work we're asked to do is getting harder. It requires more concentration, not less. If we keep living in constant interruption, our output will get worse, even if our activity looks higher." Someone in the back scoffed. Someone else muttered, "Here we go." He continued anyway. He explained switching costs without naming it like a textbook term. He described it as reheating a forge each time you walk away. He described how shallow tasks fracture attention. He described how deep work builds skill and results that are hard to copy. Then he offered the protocol. Focus blocks, visible and respected. Response windows, predictable and fair. Clear request templates. Meeting rules that cut waste. A shared expectation that not everything is urgent. He spoke in simple words. He kept his tone calm. He treated them like adults who wanted to do good work, even if their habits were loud. When he finished, silence held for a moment. Then the senior colleague leaned forward, voice cutting. "So you're saying we should all be unreachable?" They said, eyebrows raised. "No," the man said. "I'm saying we should be reachable on purpose. Not by default." The senior colleague's smile was thin. "Sounds like a way to avoid accountability." The man nodded slowly, as if accepting the concern. "Accountability increases when deliverables are clear," he said. "Right now, we hide in motion. This system makes outcomes clearer." A hand rose near the middle. A quiet coworker, someone who rarely spoke. "If we do this," they asked, voice uncertain, "what happens when someone really needs something fast?" The man answered without hesitation. "We decide what truly urgent means," he said. "We make a clear channel for real emergencies. Not everything. Just the real ones." Murmurs moved through the room. Some people nodded, relieved at the thought of fewer fake fires. Others frowned, threatened by the loss of easy control. Another voice spoke, sharper. "And what about the availability metrics?" Someone demanded. "The system punishes us if we don't answer." The man felt the eyes in the room turn toward him, like a current shifting. He inhaled. "Protected focus blocks will be marked," he said. "The high table is aware. The point is to make deep time visible as deep time, not as absence." There it was. The proof that he had allies above. The senior colleague's eyes narrowed further, annoyance flickering into something darker. Politics. Influence. The city's deeper game. The manager cleared their throat. "We'll pilot it," the manager said quickly, trying to sound decisive. "We'll test it and see what happens to output and coordination." Pilot. Test. The language of safety, of controlled risk. The room buzzed, half approval, half doubt. As people filed out afterward, some approached the man quietly. One person said, almost in a whisper, "Thank you. I'm tired." Another said, "I hope this works." A third said, "People are going to hate this." He nodded, absorbing it. The senior colleague lingered until the room was almost empty. Then they walked up close, their voice low and smooth. "You've turned the high table against the culture," they said. "I'm trying to improve our work," the man replied. The senior colleague tilted their head. "Culture doesn't like to be improved," they said. "It likes to be obeyed." The colleague's eyes flicked to the man's laptop, then back to his face. "You know what happens to people who make others look wasteful?" they murmured. "They become targets." Before the man could answer, the colleague walked away. That night, the man did his shutdown ritual. He captured loose tasks. He planned the next day. He closed the door. He did not check the thread. He did not peek at the city's chatter. He went to bed with the quiet still clinging to him. In the morning, he woke to a strange calm. The work ahead was clear. The deep forge was waiting. He arrived at the office and opened his calendar. His protected focus blocks were still there. But something else had appeared. A new series of meetings, stacked tightly across the very hours he had marked, each invite coming from different people, each labeled with the same innocent phrase that felt suddenly like a weapon. Quick sync. He stared at the pile of invites, feeling cold spread through his chest. This was not random. This was sabotage dressed as normal work. The city's shallow tribunal had learned a new tactic. If it couldn't shame him into drifting, It would bury his deep time under polite interruptions until there was no depth left to defend. His lantern screen buzzed again with another invite. And then another. The man sat very still at his desk, eyes on the calendar, and understood that the war was not over. It was entering a new phase. Question of the day: if you could protect one uninterrupted block every day, what would you use it for, and what would you cut to make it happen? Answer in the comments, and tell me the next audiobook you want retold on Momentum Mind. Like and subscribe to join the momentum, then go protect your attention like it's your future.